I welcome you all to the module 9 of this course. So, the module 9 is about social and cultural aspects to personality, and it is the first lecture of this module, and overall it is the lecture number 19. So, in today's lecture we will be focusing on the concept of gender and personality, how gender is connected to personality and what are the differences, gender differences in terms of personality. So, this some of the things associated with this aspect we will be talking about in today's lecture. So, before we talk about today's lecture, let me give you a brief recap of the last lecture. So, last lecture was lecture number 18, it was part of module 8. There we talked about the concept of locus of basically we talked about some of the mini cognitive theories associated with the concept of personality. In that context, we talked about the concept of locus of control, which was proposed by Rotter, and we tried to understand the difference between internal locus of control, external locus of control, and how it impacts human behavior. We also talked about the concept of learned helplessness, and we also tried to understand how learned helplessness as a concept evolved from animal research to, and how it was then extended to human research, and how in order to implement this whole idea of learned helplessness in the human context, the concept of explanatory style also evolved out of the concept of learned helplessness. So, we talked about all this concept in the last lecture. So, in today's lecture we will be talking about the concept of gender, some of the ideas associated with the assessment of gender. We will be giving some of the historical background of gender research in terms of personality, and we will be look at some of the fictional as well as factual ideas in the context of personality differences between men and women, and we will be also looking at some specific personality variables in terms of gender difference. So, let us start today's lecture. Now, when we talk about studying sex and gender, we are talking about this whole issue of gender difference, understanding the gender difference in terms of certain behavior has a lot of political issues associated with it, a lot of controversial issues associated with it. And when we talk about scientific study, how this whole thing kind of come together, or what is the background of this whole story. So, let us see in terms of studying sex differences, it kind of remains a lot of controversial, it's a very controversial topic in a sense that it appears in the public debates, media reports, legal cases involving gender specific issues related to like sexual harassment and so on. The concern rises that findings on sex differences might be misused to justify many political agendas, such as excluding women from leadership roles and so on. So, these are some of the kind of fear associated with studying gender differences. Critics also argue that a lot of these findings often reflect gender stereotypes rather than actual gender difference. Some psychologists have been suggested even not to even research any kind of gender difference, because it may not really contribute to any productive side of research, to avoid and also to avoid conflicts with egalitarian ideas and so on. So, people are divided people have been divided in terms of studying gender difference, because a lot of political issues are involved in it. However, many other researchers also argue that understanding sex differences is crucial for both scientific progress as well as social change. Now, simply because there are certain controversies involved in it, there is a possibility of certain conflicts and debates that should not be a hindrance or a kind of or it should not be a blockage in terms of studying this difference, because there can be many actual differences which can contribute to our understanding and may have many applied implications. Feminist psychologists like Alice Eagle in 1995 contends that sex differences are real, consistent across studies, and should not be disregarded due to political concerns. If something is real, as a scientist one should study that, one should not shy away from studying something simply because there are certain political agendas or issues or controversies associated with such things. Eagle argues that denying these differences can hinder feminist and egalitarian movements by promoting a disconnected view of reality. So, if you want to understand a certain phenomena, it has to be scientifically studied. If you simply shy away, or because of certain hindrances, if you do not study that, then we will not be able to understand the reality of it. So, we will examine some of these issues in detail, particularly in the context of personality differences. So, what is the definition and how the gender is assessed? So, there has been some background, we will be giving some background story to it. Traditionally, psychologists believe that people develop personality traits based on their biological sex, with males being masculine and females being feminine. So, this was a traditional idea that that the biological traits related to biological sex is connected to the psychological traits. So, if somebody is male, then that person will show masculine qualities. If somebody is female, that person will show feminine quality. So, it was kind of the basic idea that was associated with understanding of gender difference or sex difference in terms of and psychological traits associated with it. However, contemporary understanding of gender recognizes a more complex interaction between biological sex and personal feelings and social experiences. However, if you look at the contemporary understanding, it is not so straightforward. That if somebody is male, he will be masculine, and somebody is female, she will be feminine. It is not so straightforward. The relationship can be much more complex. A lot of recent research shows those complexity. We will touch upon some of these complexities. So, the issue of sex versus gender, how are they same or there are differences in terms of that? Now, when we talk about use the term sex, we are basically talking about a biological classification determined by chromosomes and hormones. So, biologically somebody is male, somebody is female. So, this biological classification is used with the term sex. When we talk about gender, it is more of a social classification. It has less to do with the biological male or female, it has more to do with the social aspects to it or personal feelings associated with certain gender. So, gender is more of a social classification influenced by personal feelings and social experiences. So, the idea of gender is more of a social construct. When we use the word sex, we are talking about more of a biological construct. So, psychologists distinguish between male and female, which is a biological concept. Somebody may be male and female, this is a biological thing, and masculine feminine, which is connected to the concept of gender. It may not be always correlated with the biological male or female. So, it is a social construction where the concept of masculine and feminine is mostly associated with the idea of gender. It is more of a social gender. Historically, gender was viewed as a typology, assuming a strict correspondence between gender and sex. So, historically mostly people were assuming if somebody is male biologically, he is by default he is masculine, and if somebody is female by default she is feminine. So, that was the historical traditional view. Any deviation from this was looked at as a kind of problematic or some disorder or something like that. So, people were, if somebody deviates from that, if somebody is let us say male and shows certain feminine characters, and then it was considered as a more of a deviation rather than norm. So, that was a historical kind of conceptualization. Now, as the time progressed, as the research progressed, their whole measurement or identification of gender evolved also. So, there was a typology model, which initially gender was measured dichotomously. People were either masculine or feminine, aligning with the biological sex. So, that is a typical typology model. So, people are either masculine, feminine with alignment of their biological sex, which basically means male and female. Then this bipolar model came. Later, this masculinity and femininity were combined into a single bipolar dimension, which basically means this model implies that more masculine a person was, the less feminine they were, and the vice versa. So, it is a bipolar model. So, which shows both masculinity and femininity are kind of combined into a single bipolar dimension. So, in one extreme end is feminine and another extreme is masculine characteristics, and if one increases, other decreases. So, that was the idea of bipolar model of gender measurement. One of the typical example of this approach was used by Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory MMPI, which we discussed in the assessment of personality in detail. So, this is a very popular scale to measure personality, particularly related to psychological disorders and so on in the clinical context. So, it measures masculinity, femininity in the scale also. The scale also measures masculinity and femininity using this bipolar concept. So, in this test high masculinity scores for women and low scores for men indicates a kind of pathology. So, basically if some woman scores high on masculinity and low score, and if a man scores low on masculinity, that means there is a deviation. So, it is considered some kind of pathology. So, this was kind of earlier development. So, it was in line with the bipolar model. The two-dimensional model also evolved, which says in somewhere 1970s, psychologists recognized the limitations of unidimensional model. So, in the unidimensional model, basically the bipolar model that we talked about. So, there is an two extreme of the same thing, one extreme is masculine, another is feminine, and if one increases, other decreases. So, that was the idea. In the two-dimensional model, it recognizes that earlier model was not true, was capturing the true picture of gender aspect. So, they propose that masculinity and femininity are separate dimensions. They are not two ends of same dimensions, they are separate dimensions, they are completely different aspects. So, we cannot say one increases, other decreases. If you are saying, that means they are same thing. If one increases, other decreases, that means they are same dimensions, only two extremes. In two-dimensional model, they are saying no, they are actually completely different dimensions. One may not be correlated with the other. Both may increase, both may decrease. It is not necessary that if one increases, other should decrease, allowing individual to exhibit traits from both the spectrums. So, it is possible somebody has high masculinity as well as maybe a high score in the femininity and so on. So, because these are two dimensions, both can have high score, low score, whatever it is. When it is unidimensional, you cannot have both score high, one score high, one should be low. So, this approach acknowledges that a person can be high in both traditional masculine and feminine traits, it is possible. So, that is called two-dimensional model. It tries to capture more nuances of the gender aspect in this model. So, some of the key instruments that uses this two-dimensional model, basically they measures masculinity and femininity as a separate dimensions. Some of the scales that are popular in this context or that uses this model, one is called Personal Attributes Questionnaire, PAQ. It measures masculinity and femininity as a separate scales. Okay. So, this is one scale. Another scale which is very popular also is called BAM Sex Role Inventory, BSRI. It also measures these traits as separate scales. Okay. Many studies shows that these two scales yields almost similar results and are highly correlated with each other. So, that means both the scales were found to be valid and correlated to each other. Additionally, also they found there is no correlation between masculinity and femininity scale. They also found that correlation between masculinity and femininity is not very strong, or there is no correlation, which shows that both can be separate dimensions, supporting the notion that these are independent dimensions or separate dimensions. This two-dimensional model allows for a richer understanding of gender, recognizing that people can embody a mix of masculinity, femininity traits regardless of their biological sex. So, regardless of what sex you have, either male or female, you can have a multiple combination of gender, which is a social construct. So, one may have masculinity high, even though biologically one may be feminine, maybe female. So, like that. So, this allows a lot of variations, lot of complexities that are observed in the real world. So, it tries to capture all these ideas. So, this gender classification can be understood using several categories based on scores of masculinity, femininity. These categories are derived from measurement of using measurement instrument like we have discussed, like the scales that we have discussed. So, this classification system allows for a nuanced understanding of gender, recognizing that individual can exhibit diverse range of gender traits beyond traditional just binary conceptions of male female. So, there are many possibilities. For example, one classification could be based on these scales, this model of two-dimensional model. There could be possible feminine sex typed individual, where basically it is a woman who score high on femininity and low in masculinity. So, the typical traditional idea of gender and sex, where this female shows high score on femininity and low on masculinity. So, typical construct of female. So, these are called feminine sex type. So, this is one possibility. There can be masculine sex type, which means men who score high on masculinity and low on femininity, typical traditional concept. men with high masculinity and low femininity. So, this could be two possibilities. Another is androgynous possibility, where individuals, it could be both men and women, who score high in both masculinity and femininity. So, they possess attributes associated with both the genders. So, these are the person, it may be male or female biologically, but they possess psychologically both feminine and high score on both feminine and masculine qualities. So, these are called androgynous individuals. There could be also possibility of undifferentiated individuals, where individuals who score low on both masculinity and femininity. So, they neither have high score on masculinity nor they have high score on femininity. So, they score low on both the aspects. So, they are called as undifferentiated. So, when we talk about gender, we are mostly talking about this one, the psychological aspects, the social aspect of it. There is also another possibility called cross sex typed, where basically the women who score high in masculinity. So, this is just opposite of that, woman, the biologically woman or female, but their characteristics psychologically are more of a masculine type, or the vice versa, or if a man who score high on femininity. So, biologically one is male, but psychological characteristics are more towards femininity and low in masculinity. So, these are called as a cross typed individuals. So, if you just see this one, how this all these dimensions came up. So, basically these are combination of masculinity in one side and femininity one side. So, feminine low, high, masculinity low, high. So, there can be 4 combination when both low masculinity, no femininity, this is undifferentiated categories. High masculine and low feminine is masculine sex type if male, cross sex type if female. So, basically high masculine, if somebody is female high masculine type, then it is cross sex type. So, this is possibility. Low masculine and high feminine. So, this is feminine sex type if female, cross sex type if male. High masculine and high feminine both are high, then it is androgynous. If both are low, this is undifferentiated, and combination could lead to cross typed or masculine sex type or feminine sex typed individual. Okay. So, these are different possibilities with all the possible combinations of masculinity and femininity. So, all these possibilities are there and all kinds of individuals exist. So, this is something I know that when you talk about gender, it can be very complex. It is not just always not necessarily in alignment with the biological male and female aspect. So, there can be multiple possibilities. So, let us give about some of the historical background of this whole gender difference study in the context of personality. So, before 1973, the study of sex difference received very little attention. Before 70s, people were not really looking at this gender difference or sex difference in the research context, because that was not the trend at that time. With psychological research, mostly doing research using male participant, mostly typically male participant, and that too mostly from the university students and so on. So, mostly the research participants were male participants. So, gender difference was not a focus, even though females were there, but the numbers were very less. Even with both sexes included, few research analyzed report sex based. Some research even included both males and females, but they never given focus in terms of gender difference or analyzing gender difference. This began to change in early 70s. A significant turning point was in 1974 with the publication of a book, The Psychology of Sex Difference, by Eleanor McCoby and Carol Jacqueline. So, this was a book which was a dedicated book on understanding or kind of summarizing research based on gender or sex difference at that time. This book was a turning point, mostly in the context of personality differences between males and females or sex differences. They reviewed basically in that book numerous studies on sex differences and made many conclusions. Whatever was available at that time, so they tried to summarize all the studies on gender sex differences and they tried to summarize that in that book. So, this book actually was one of the first kind of turning point in terms of looking at gender difference or sex differences, typically in the context of various psychological constructs including personality. some of the conclusions that was there in that book based on whatever was available at that time, they found that women slightly outperformed men in verbal ability. So, basically women were better than males in verbal ability in terms of speaking, while men had slight advantages in mathematical and spatial abilities. So, men tend to score higher on the mathematical ability and spatial ability in terms of imagination, in terms of arranging objects in the space and so on. So, this was the finding at that time. They also reported that men were more aggressive than women, but saw no significant sex difference in other personality traits or social behavior, deeming the existing differences are minor or trivial. So, they found except one or two things, like in the measures of aggression, male scored higher than the female, whatever research was available at that time, and they did not find any other specific major difference in any other personality dimensions, and they found most of the other differences are very trivial or may not be of any significance. So, the psychology of sex difference, this book spurred extensive research. So, this was the book that was a turning point, and after that many research actually started looking at sex differences in their research. However, some of the criticism was also there about this book, because book was published in 1970s. Some critics argued that this book underrepresented number of sex differences. So, they said, many critics argued that there are many other differences which was ignored in that book, and questioned their finding on male aggression at that time also. Many criticized the method used in the book in terms of coming to those conclusions, though at that time it was standard, but now in the present context obviously lot of the methods are very crude and rudimentary probably. This book, however, influenced journals to change their reporting practices, mandated the calculation of reporting of sex differences. So, whatever it is, even though some people criticize, but this book was that stimulated a lot of research, and even journal also asked for reporting gender differences in the researches. So, this led to increase in the inclusion of female participant in the studies. So, female participant also actually increased in lot of researches. This shift resulted in a surge of research on sex differences, with thousands of studies conducted on the subject. So, the trend changed after that. Now, let us see some of the traditional beliefs about gender difference in terms of certain personality dimensions or certain behavioral dimensions. So, these are all beliefs, these are not like research findings. So, some of the traditional beliefs we will see, and we will see whether these are true in the research context or not. So, some of the beliefs include, like men are more agentic and instrumental, women are expressive and communal. Communal in the sense they are more of a community oriented approach, a relationship oriented approach. So, this is one thing. In terms of personality, men are more active, competitive, independent, self confident. Women are emotional, gentle, understanding, devoted. So, these are all traditional beliefs. In terms of social roles, these are beliefs, there are beliefs that men are more in terms of leaders, financial providers, head of households. For social roles, women are considered in terms of caregivers, providing emotional support, homemakers and so on. Physical attributes, men are more athletic, brawny, broad shouldered, physically strong. For women, it is dainty, pretty, soft voice, graceful and so on. Men are in terms of emotional experience, they experience more of anger and pride. Women are more emotionally expressive, experience wider range of other emotions. In terms of cognition, men are good at abstract thinking, problem solving, women are good at verbal reasoning, artistic and so on. So, these are some of the summary of traditional beliefs that are there in the psyche of lot of in the collective psyche of human mind, which we believe that how men differs from females in certain roles. So, these are all traditional beliefs, and a lot of these are actually stereotypes. Stereotypes in the sense these are generalized beliefs. Some of people in a group shows, and then you generalize it to everybody, which may not be true. When you talk about stereotypes, these are like generalized belief. Some people may show it, but then you are saying everybody in that group are like that, which may not be true. So, this is most of these are related to gender stereotypes. While societal and media portrayals of gender roles are prevalent, a lot of these are also kind of prevalent in societal beliefs, media roles and so on, psychological research offers a more nuanced understanding of personality differences between men and women. So, we will see some of these psychological researches. Fortunately, gender and gender differences are extensively studied topic in psychology after 70s. So, we have some empirical support to lot of gender differences which we will be talking about. Now, one thing before we talk about actual personality differences in terms of research, some research actually shows in terms of mental disorder there is some clear cut gender differences. What kind of disorder male experience and what kind of disorder female experience in terms of prevalence, in terms of frequency. So, there has some research showed that there is a possibility of gender difference. When examining mental disorders, there are notable differences in the prevalence between males and females. That does not mean males and whatever disorder male experience, female cannot experience, it is not that. Only in the prevalence rate there is a difference. So, females experience more of this when we say something is more prevalent like that. So, men are more frequently affected by substance related disorder like alcohol, drugs and so on. Childhood disorders like mental retardation, reading disorders, autism and so on, and sexual and gender identity disorders, some of these like pedophilia, fetishism and so on, these are more found more prevalent among males. So, this is not like only male disorder, but the thing is the prevalence more male report in terms of if you see the data, the more in terms of numbers or in terms of percentages male report this kind of disorder more as compared to females. In contrast, mood disorders like panic disorders, bipolar disorder, anorexia and bulimia, which are eating disorders, and depression are more prevalent among women. So, this is some typical lot of research shows there can be some gender difference in terms of what kind of disorders are experienced more by males and females. So, there is some at least data available in that direction. Some other personality disorders such as schizotypal personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, compulsive personality disorders are more common in men. So, these are some personality disorders related to personality like schizotypal, antisocial, narcissistic, compulsive personality, these are more prevalent among male. On the other hand, some other personality disorder like borderline personality disorders, histrionic personality disorder are common in women. Despite these findings, these characteristics are not strictly indicative of personality. Only in the prevalence rate they found to be differences in the terms of male and female. So, the question remains, there are differences in the personality traits of men and women, whether there are actual differences, if so in what ways. So, let us see personality differences between men and women, what is factual and what is fictional. Let us see in the context of some research findings. So, men and women are perceived to differ in various aspects, as we have discussed some of the traditional beliefs associated with this, which may be in the context of behavior, physical attributes, emotional experiences, cognitions, occupation, interest and so on. However, are there really in the actuality are there such differences, or these are like or if such differences exist, are they really significant? So, let us see some of the research evidences. Janet Hydes did a meta-analysis in 2007, including extensive national studies, revealed that 78% of the reported effects of gender difference are either small or non-significant. So, meta-analysis is basically when a large number of studies in a particular area or particular topic, when they further analyze to see the patterns in those particular area, when they collect research, when a lot of research are done in a particular area to find the patterns in that area, where the researches are going, what are the findings. So, meta-analysis is done. Basically, it means analysis of the analysis, and one such analysis in terms of sex difference or gender difference was done in 2007, and one of the major conclusion of this meta-analysis is that about 78% of reported difference are either very small difference which can be neglected or like non-significant or non-significant. So, a lot of these are actually not really very significant differences. There are differences, but may not be very strong difference in terms of gender. So, some of the findings, significant findings which they reported are like here it is summarized. So, they found there are no gender differences in these characteristics that are mentioned or shown in the slide. So, they found in the impulsiveness dimension of neuroticism there was no gender difference. Gregariousness dimension of the extroversion, then activity dimension of the extroversion, intellect dimensions of the openness, order dimensions of the conscientiousness, general intelligence, mathematical ability, verbal ability, leadership effectiveness, self confidence. In all these there is no actual gender difference. So, this was one of the findings. They found there are some gender difference observed in certain characteristics. This includes which is shown in the slide, sympathy dimensions of agreeableness, more specific detail we will be talking about little later, assertiveness dimensions of the extroversion, sexuality, non-verbal behavior, aggressiveness, risk taking, occupational preferences, mental disorders, some of this we have already discussed, leadership style, leadership effectiveness they found no difference, but in terms of style of leadership they found some difference in the gender male and female. So, in these dimensions they found some differences were observed in both males and females. They also found there may be gender difference based on certain contextual factors, there may be some differences in some of these characteristics, which includes empathy, emotional experience, what kind of emotions one experiences, anxiety, helping behavior, influenceability, self esteem, spatial ability and so on. So, we will see some of these details later on. So, it is said that there may be some gender difference in some of these characteristics depending on the some context. Now, the 5-factor model of personality that we discussed in earlier module, which is one of the most important and the most which has received the highest empirical support, is the 5-factor model in the trait theory of personality. Some research tried to understand in these 5 factors of traits how men and women differ in terms of this 5-factor model. So, it is well understood that men and women differ in the physical attributes, sexuality and so on due to the different reproductive role. However, what is surprising to many is that significant number of similarities between men and women in the personality trait. They found a lot of actually differences are not that important and similarities are more than the differences in terms of personality. So, data from an extensive study using the Neo Personality Inventory, which measures this 5-factor model across 50 cultures including United States, reveals some of these differences. Now, this research only focused on 5-factor model, 5-factor traits. So, these are findings of this one. So, here basically shows this positive number mean male scored higher than females, negative number means female scored higher than males. So, all these negative numbers are where female scored higher, positive means male scored higher. So, these are coefficients which shows the strength of the difference, to what extent they are different. So, in some of this 5-factor model there is large or medium differences, in some the differences are very small, in some the differences are trivial. So, you can see here all the data. So, in neuroticism dimension of 5-factor model, particularly these two, anxiety and impulsiveness, neuroticism overall they found there is a medium difference. So, minus means female scored higher than the males in the trait of neuroticism, and among the neuroticism they found also impulsiveness, the difference is actually very trivial, and anxiety the difference is small, but overall it is a medium difference. In the trait of extroversion they found again small differences, not much difference, and some of the dimensions of extroversions like gregariousness, the difference is very trivial. gregariousness, activity, the difference is very trivial, but assertiveness they found the difference is actually large. In the assertiveness the difference is large. So, they found males score higher on the assertiveness. So, it is positive score means males scored higher. Then comes openness, again the difference is very trivial, there is not much difference, actual difference. So, the difference is very trivial. In the construct of agreeableness, so all these 5 dimensions we have discussed in detail in the trait model. So, I will not go into the definition of these traits here. In the agreeableness again the difference is small, and except one dimension of agreeableness which is tender mindedness, the difference is very large, which and the score is minus means women score higher on this dimension than males in the dimensions of tender mindedness. In the dimension of conscientiousness again the difference is small, and in other dimensions also the difference is small. So, you can see here in the 5 factor model also very few factors actually there is actually medium or large difference, most of them are in the category of small or trivial differences. So, here basically neuroticism shows one specifically where there is a very significant gender difference, one can say women scoring higher than male. Openness, there was no difference across all cultures, women tended to be slightly higher than male in conscientiousness, extroversion and agreeableness. So, this is like some of the summary. So, the difference is not that very strong in most of these dimensions. There are large differences as we have discussed in some facet of these dimensions, like men scored higher on assertiveness while women score higher on tender mindedness. These 2 facets were basically they showed actually very large difference in terms of males and females. Small differences exist in anxiety, trust and order, the women scoring higher on all the 3. Other facets such as impulsiveness, gregariousness, activity and openness to ideas shows only very trivial differences, which means it is not really much difference. Overall, the conclusion is that men and women are not, in terms of 5 factors, the difference is not very sharp, differences are not noticed in this actually, and similarity could be more than actually the differences. So, this is about 5 factors models. Now, we will see some of the possible gender difference in certain specific aspects of personality. So, we will be talking about first aggression. What is the result? What is the research findings related to the gender difference in terms of aggression, in terms of showing the behavior related to anger and so on. So, some of the consistent finding across countries include, one of the most consistent finding both in the US and other countries is that men are more aggressive than women. So, in terms of aggression, a lot of research shows that men shows more aggression than female. The list of studies are large, which includes very old studies also, very new studies also. However, some of the meta-analysis which are kind of even 1996 also of many studies shows that many nuance aspects associated with this gender and aggression. So, it is not again very straightforward, like men are high and women are low. These are like very straightforward answer, and in research the people then try to find out many nuances. In real life things are not so straightforward. So, for example, when you talk about aggression, there can be different aspects to it. One is physical aggression, one is verbal aggression. So, meta-analysis showed that men are more physically aggressive than women. Some in terms of significant differences were observed, but only slightly more verbally aggressive. So, in terms of verbal aggression, the difference is much less as compared to actual physical aggression, except when women are directly threatened. So, when women are directly threatened, then that aggression score is not much difference, almost similar to male, in which case the gender difference almost disappears. In the context of unprovoked and directly threatened aggression, some research, Betancourt and Miller also found in their meta-analysis the gender difference in aggression are most apparent under experimental condition of unprovoked expression. When no one is provoking, then the gender difference is highest, but it vanishes when directly threatened in certain situation, then male female differences is very less. Physical aggression, again the men are more likely to resort to physical aggression whether provoked or not. So, physical aggression men always scored higher, Verbal aggression, when provoked, women slightly more likely to respond with verbal aggression. So, here women scored slightly higher than male in terms of verbal aggression. These are some of the meta-analyses that were done in most of the Western context, and this was like quite few decades back study. Now, responses to different situations also some differences were observed, like physical attack, insult and negative evaluation. In that context, men and women respond almost equally aggressively when there is a physical attack, when there is an insult, when there is a negative evaluation. In the context of frustration, men are more likely to respond aggressively as compared to male. In the context of insult about intelligence, men are more likely to respond aggressively. So, some situational factors were also observed in terms of gender differences. There was also some differences observed in the laboratory and field studies. Most studies on aggression have been conducted in laboratory setting. A lot of these findings that we discussed are mostly in the context of laboratory setting studies, where participants were showing maybe a lot of artificial behavior also, that is possible when you put them in the laboratory conditions. However, a later meta-analysis of field studies, now some other studies meta-analysis are also done on studies that were actually done on the real world field studies, and the large scale studies on 9 other countries including India, Japan, Australia, Canada suggest that gender differences in aggression are more pronounced than early meta-analysis indicated. They found some more pronounced differences later on in the field studies. Like some of these are based on field studies. In the case of physical and verbal aggression, so there was earlier the result that we discussed was based on mostly laboratory studies. In the context of field studies in the more real life setting, the analysis found that men exhibit more physical and verbal aggression than women, with effect sizes of overall aggression ranging from 0.4 to 2. So, the difference is much stronger in the field studies as compared to laboratory studies, and here they found men exhibit higher score on both verbal as well as physical aggression. Not only from direct data were when collected from the peers, from the teachers, observers and also self report. Most of the so many sources of data actually showed this. The gender differences in the aggression are most significant during young adulthood. So, during young adulthood page from the age of 18 to 22, this difference is much more stronger. So, here male score much stronger than female, with effect size of 0.66, which is quite high and tend to decrease with age. So, as the age increases, then this gender difference also decreases. Men show higher levels of physical aggression with effect sizes ranging from 0.39 to self reports to 0.84 to observer reports. So, overall men showed more aggression in the field studies actually shows, but this is more significant, the gender difference is more stronger during the young adulthood phase, and this reduces as the age progresses. Then comes indirect or relational aggression in girls. So, this is one thing that was also observed. In contrast, during late childhood and adolescence, girls tends to engage in more indirect and relational aggression than boys, with an effect size of 0.74. So, indirect aggression, which is not directly physical aggression, but more of an something like observational studies reveal that girls more likely than boys to intentionally harm others through social exclusion, gossips, turning other against someone. So, these are like not directly aggression, but some indirect aggression, including social exclusion, gossiping and turning other against someone and so on. In that context, particularly during childhood and adolescence, the girls tend to score more on this as compared to boys. So, these were some of the differences that were observed in the context of aggression and the gender. Now, let us see some of the differences of gender in terms of risk taking behaviors. So, again when we talk about sensation seeking and risk taking behavior or risky behaviors, men generally score higher in impulsive sensation seeking activities such as bungee jumping while on vacation. So, mostly the risk taking behavior, mostly again men shows more as compared to females. However, there are only slightly more likely than women to engage in daily risky behaviors that may have undesirable or dangerous outcomes. So, when the behavior comes which are in the daily activities which are very undesirable and dangerous outcome, then there is not much difference in terms of risk taking behavior, which may include things like speeding or running yellow lights and so on. So, there not much difference, but sensation seeking activities like bungee jumping while in vacation, there probably there is a much more stronger gender difference, with male scoring higher on those dimensions. Certain contextual and age dependent differences could be there in the risk taking behavior also in the context of gender. The extent of gender difference in risk taking behaviors depends on the context also, like type of risk involved and age. Although small to medium effect sizes consistently showed that men take more risk than women, the most significant gender difference are observed in the actual risky behaviors people engage in, while the difference in attitudes towards risky activities are smaller. So, actually when somebody takes risky behavior in the behavioral action terms, then the difference is much stronger, but when attitudes are asked about certain risky behavior, then there is not much difference. Also, research shows there is some trend over time changes in the risk taking behavior between genders. So, the gender difference in risky behaviors have shown signs of decreasing over time. So, that means women are taking much more risky behaviors as the time progresses. The mean effect size of studies conducted from 1964 to 80 was 0.20 compared to 0.13 for those conducted from 81 to 97. So, the difference is decreasing between male and female in terms of taking risky behavior with the passage of time. So, maybe more recent studies and more future studies will show whether this difference now actually exists or not. Now, let us come to the gender difference in terms of empathy and tender mindedness. So, when we talk about empathy, we are talking about to what extent we are able to understand others' perspective. So, putting yourself in the shoes of others. So, that is empathy, so, tender mindedness is about more of an emotional quality in terms of understanding others and emotional support and so on. One of the largest personality difference that was observed, that women exhibit more of empathy and sympathy than men. So, this quality have been found to be more expressed by women or reported by women. This tender mindedness, a facet of agreeableness, shows the largest gender difference across 50 cultures including the United States. The effect sizes are 0.39, minus 0.39, basically minus means women score higher for observed rating, and minus 0.28 for self rating, and minus 0.92 in a meta analysis using various measures of tender mindedness. So, across different countries and cultures, it shows women score higher on empathy and tender mindedness. This suggests that women are indeed more empathic and sensitive to others' plight than men. Now, these findings are based on mostly self-report measures of feeling rather than the actual performance or accuracy of understanding of others' emotions. So, it was mostly self-report studies. So, probably things may change when we look at actual behavior in the real world. So, in terms of self-report and actual performance in empathy, there may be some possible differences. The studies of empathic accuracy, participants view videotaped interactions and try to identify the emotions of individual involved. So, this was the task given, where when videotapes were shown where people are interacting, and in terms of when asked to identify the emotions involved in those interactions, women reported greater accuracy in judging emotions than men, but actual performance shows no significant difference, but when actually in the probably in the real setting, not much difference were observed. This suggests that women may present themselves more empathic in self-reports, possibly due to gender role stereotypes. So, that is also possible that because of gender role stereotypes, that self-presentation in terms of empathy and tender-mindedness probably is reported more by women than male. Even in actual performance, it may be not that difference was observed in terms of actual performance. So, empathy across different measures. In some earlier meta-analysis which I examined empathy across various tasks, including emotional responsiveness, physiological measures, facial expression, tone of voice, self-report empathy. The results are inconsistent here in all these cases, but one clear effect emerged, that female showed more empathy on self-report measures and related measures of empathy, but there was not much gender difference on unobtrusive measures such as facial expressions or physiological distress. So, when physiological distress and those measures were also included in addition to self-report, those other measures actually did not show much difference, but in terms of self-report, women reported much more higher score in terms of empathy than males. So, this pattern suggests that participants may behave in line with gender roles when they know the empathy is being monitored and so on. So, that is also possible, maybe an effect of when somebody thinks that I measured in a certain context which is more in tune with one's role, then probably they are more likely to report it higher. In the context of emotional contagion, when to what extent emotion spreads, basically what emotional contagion basically means spread of emotion from one person to another person. So, emotion is highly contagious, so it spreads. If somebody is sad, the people nearby people also become sad. So, because that is why emotion get transferred. If someone is happy, people around that person also becomes happy because emotion get transferred. So, that is called emotional contagion. Women are more likely to feel the emotions of those around them as indicated by self-report measures of emotional contagion. So, emotional contagion is more likely to be detected by women as compared to men. Women reported experiencing happiness, fear, anger and sadness more frequently when around other experiencing these same emotions. So, they are more likely to detect others' emotion and experience it themselves. In the context of non-verbal perceptiveness basically means in the context of body language, women also demonstrated greater non-verbal perceptiveness. They are better at reading body language and facial expressions, recognizing faces and expressing emotions non-verbally, particularly through facial expression. So, in the context of non-verbal perceptions and expression, women scored higher than male in all these aspects. Additionally, women engages in more eye contact during interaction than men and so on. So, in lot of these emotional aspects, women most of the measures and researches shows this generally scored higher than males. Now, let us come to the gender difference in leadership effectiveness and style. So, in terms of leadership effectiveness, there is no significant gender difference, both were effective in their own ways when leadership role comes. So, there is no actual difference found in any studies, but in terms of style some differences were observed. So, while men and women are equally effective as leader, they tend to exhibit some different leadership styles. Women are more likely to adopt a democratic leadership style, sharing power and decision making with their team members with little higher than males. So, more of a democratic leadership style is expressed by women, which is connected to not decentralization of power, sharing power and decision making with the team members and so on. In contrast, men are more likely to adopt autocratic leadership style, where they make decisions more of independently. So, this is a trend, not that everybody will show like that, but this is when large scale samples are studied, the trend is like that. More men show autocratic leadership as compared to females, more females shows democratic leadership as compared to males. So, these are like when average taken in a large sample. That does not mean every male will be like autocratic and every female will be democratic, not necessary. So, task and social leadership, the difference in leadership styles are context dependent. So, the men are more likely to emerge as leader in task oriented situation. So, when very task oriented situation are there, men are more likely to perform better in terms of leadership, where the primary goal is to complete task and maintain productivity with and those kind of situation. Generally task oriented situation, male generally emerges better leaders. Women on the other hand are more likely to emerge as leaders in social oriented situations, where they focus on working well together and maintaining group integrity and so on. So, the context of effectiveness or style may differ. In certain situations, women tend to perform better as compared to male in terms of leadership roles. So, the style could be different. So, these are the summary of findings that we already discussed. So, the effectiveness there is no difference, but in terms of style there is a difference. So, that is something that is observed. Now, what is the cause for gender difference? So, let us see at the end. So, we have observed some gender differences, and in some context there is no differences, but there is no doubt that there is certain gender differences in certain personality dimensions. So, what is the reasons behind it? What are the causes? So, one cause why there is a gender difference in terms of certain personality characteristics one major cause is socialization. How socialization happens for males and females or girls and boys. So, socialization theory says that boys and girls develop different personalities because they are reinforced by parents, teachers and media to adopt behaviors that are suitable as per their gender or sex. So, there is a constant portrayal that boys should be like this, girls should be like this. So, there are certain socialization process that all the time kind of projects certain roles. So, those are reinforced by parents, teachers, somewhere everywhere they get this indication that certain behaviors are appropriate for boys, certain behaviors are appropriate for girls. So, through the socialization process from the childhood, a child learns to differentiate how a boy should behave and how a girl should behave. So, this leads to differences in their mindset. So, boys are typically encouraged to be masculine, receiving let us say something like baseball bats or cricket bats and trucks and being praised for rough play, while girls are encouraged to be feminine, receiving dolls and being praised for obedience and cuteness and so on. So, there is a kind of socialization, whole process is very different for boys and girls. So, that also that leads to differences in their mindset and the personality differences emerges later. So, boys are often punished for crying, while girls are comforted, leading to the adoption of gender specific behaviors over time. So, slowly over time through socialization they imbibe those ideas projected by others. Albert Bandura's social learning theory that we discussed in earlier module also says that boys and girls learn behavior by observing same sex models from parents, teachers and peers. So, they observe how females behave, adult females behaves, adult teacher behaves, adult peer or their peer groups, the similar gender behaves. So, they kind of slowly learn by observing others. Boys observe male role models engaging in work, while girls observe female role models in the domestic task, further reinforces gender specific behaviors. So, there are empirical evidence also to support these ideas. Studies from 1970s and 80s found that fathers engage in more physical play with sons than daughters, a trend that persists even today. Additionally, parents have historically provided gender typical toys to the children. Boys received let us say something cars and sports equipments, while girls received dolls and household items. Parents still view gender typical toys more desirable. So, the kind of toys, kind of things, kind of sports they engage in also differs. This is kind of research shows not only in one culture, in almost every cultures it is like this. So, this cross cultural studies also indicate differential treatment for boys and girls. So, this also leads to possibly causes personality differences. However, the direction of causality in socialization is questioned. It is unclear whether parents drive children's behavior or vice versa, whether it is because of the parents or the societal role that they become like that, or it may be opposite also in the sense they have these preferences, so other gives them. So, the direction may be may not be very clear in all cases. So, research by Jadva et al. 2010 suggests inherent preferences might play a role. As infant showed sex linked toy preferences, boys may prefer certain things. So, they are given like that. So, that is another way also it is possible. This indicates that while socialization is significant, no doubt about it, some actual gender difference may be there in terms of their biological preferences. So, from socialization comes social role theory, which is connected to that only. So, basically what kind of roles we get in our life as a male, as a female. So, it is related to socialization only. So, the social role theory says that sex difference arises because men and women are distributed into different occupational family roles. They are given different roles in the society. So, that the difference arises because of those roles, different role givens. So, traditionally men are expected to be breadwinners, women are expected to be homemakers. Consequently, children learn behavior associated with these roles, with girls becoming nurturing and emotionally supportive and boys becoming tough and aggressive and so on. So, possibly these social roles make them different in terms of their psychological qualities and ultimately personality differences. Evidence supporting social role theory includes continued distribution of men and women into different roles in different countries, like they are given here evidence of North America. Women tend to be more involved in domestic and childcare roles, while men are more engaged in occupational roles. So, in all cultures, if you see these social roles, there different roles are given to males and females, which could also explain. So, accordingly their psychological characteristics also differs. Even in egalitarian societies like developed societies like Canada, women perform more housework than men. So, even countries where men and women difference is very less, even there also if you see the gender roles can very clearly be seen that more females does certain work and more males does particular type of work. Additionally, a study using event sampling procedure found that social role assignment significantly influence dominant behavior in both men and women. So, what kind of roles are given to men and women, that determines their characteristics also. So, characteristics may change even for male and female depending on what kind of roles are given. So, people displayed, for example, people displayed more dominance when assigned to supervisor roles, more submissiveness when assigned to subordinate roles regardless of their gender. So, whether male or female, what kind of roles are given, that influences their characteristics. So, if when females are even given kind of supervisory role, they show certain dominance characteristics which are dominant characteristics, and even when males are given subordinate roles, they showed submissiveness or feminine qualities and so on. So, sometimes what kind of roles are given, that also determines, and because consistently females were given certain roles, consistently males were given certain roles, that influence their characteristics. The social role theory is increasingly testable in family and occupational dynamics, because it is changing in today's world. Women are more in breadwinning roles, and men are assuming greater responsibilities for domestic duties. Nowadays, scenarios are changing in terms of what kind of roles each gender plays. Even in same sex relationships or homosexuals, houseworks are allocated more equally, presumably due to less emphasis on traditional sex typical behavior. Now, this is changing, so the patterns should also change. So it is more easier to see this social role theory in the today's world, because roles are changing, that means characteristics should also change. However, this prediction that sex difference will diminish as society becomes more equal or egalitarian has not been consistently supported. Research did not show very consistent support to this idea. For example, in a study of more than 17,637 individuals in 55 cultures, found that most gendered egalitarian countries showed larger sex difference in personality. Even in countries where there is a very less gender differences in terms of opportunities they get, even there also very large sex differences were observed in their personality characteristics. The surprising result suggests that personality traits and sex differences might be less important in collectivist cultures and more freely expressed in more developed parts of the world. So, this suggests that it is possible that in certain cultures personality traits differences might be less important in certain cultures and more freely expressed in, let us say, developed cultures. So, even though they are equal, but their inherent traits are freely expressed. So, it is possible that certain those cultural elements may play a role here. So, the idea is socialization, social role can play a very important role, but still it shows that somewhere there may be certain inherent differences between males and female in terms of certain preferences, but a lot of it could also be contributed by the social roles or the kind of socialization that child goes through from their childhood can also help in terms of making these differences in the psychological characteristics, which ultimately leads to personality differences. So, one factor is the socialization thing. Another, some suggest that there may be also actual hormonal differences, hormonal theory, which leads to these gender differences or sex differences in terms of behavior. So, these hormonal theories of sex difference suggest that men and women exhibit different behaviors not more due to social environment, but because of their underlying differences in physiology or the hormonal differences in the body itself. These physiological differences rather than social treatment are believed to be the main cause for these differences in the behavior. Several studies try to examine this link, particularly hormones related to testosterone and certain sex linked behaviors and so on. Some studies shows in the uterohormonal influence, so means when a child is in the uterus before the birth, evidence indicate that the hormonal influence on sex differences begin in the uterus itself, when a baby is not still born. For instance, congenital adrenal hyperplasia CAH in females is a condition in females which results in hormonal masculinization. So, some females become more of a masculine quality in terms of physical attributes. So, this condition can happen which leads to preferences for male typical toys and better performance in traditionally masculine cognitive tasks and occupations. So, their behavior also becomes much more masculine in terms of which are very similar to masculine characteristics, which may be because of the impact of uterohormonal influences. So, even though biologically they are females, but they become much more similar to in terms of masculine qualities, which might have happened because of certain hormonal impact on the child when she was in uterus. This suggests that fetal hormone exposure can have lasting effect on gender related interest and abilities. So, that actually can change certain differences. So, this is one of the evidence that it shows that how hormone can make differences in terms of even personality characteristics. Another aspect is circulating hormone levels that is there in the body that can also leads to gender differences in terms of behavior. So, after puberty, men and women have significantly different levels of circulating testosterone as a hormone, that their level is very different in males and females. That also impacts in terms of behavior. So, women's testosterone levels basically is low in the lower range. So, that is about 200 to 440 picograms per milliliter of blood depending on the menstrual cycle phase and so on, whereas men's levels are between 5140 to 6460 picograms. So, the level is much higher, even more somewhere around double of what women have in terms of testosterone level. These differences are associated with traditional sex differences in behavior such as aggression, dopamine, dominance and career choices. So, testosterone has impact on all the psychological characteristics. It influences or it makes people more aggressive, dominance, career choices and all the psychological traits may be influenced by this higher level of testosterone level. So, that is why male shows more of these characteristics as compared to females. Higher testosterone levels in women are linked to pursuing male some women, when testosterone level increases in them, it has been found to be linked with pursuing male typical careers, greater career success, while higher testosterone in both sexes is associated with greater dominance and aggressiveness. So, even if a female has higher testosterone level, then it shows similar higher aggression and so on. So, these hormones could play a role in terms of psychological characteristics. Now, the problem with all of these studies is that it is difficult to find causation, because these are mostly probably correlational studies, where you find if one is high then something else is high. So, if testosterone level is high then more aggression. So, there is a correlation, but is it a causation? Is it causing it or not? It's not so easy to make such kind of conclusion. While higher testosterone level are correlational with certain behaviors, causation is not easy to establish, or in most cases it is difficult, is not definitely established. Some studies suggest that increase in testosterone follow rise in status and dominance rather than preceding them. So, it is possible the other way around can also happen. Research shows when you become highly dominant or when you get success in certain life, your testosterone level actually increases. So, is it because of testosterone that you are showing this quality, or is it because of you are showing this quality, so testosterone level is increasing. So, which way around is not easy to kind of detect. Probably it can be in both ways. For instance, sports fan whose team won an event had higher testosterone levels than those whose team lost. So, it was found even fans whose team won, so they associated themselves with a winning team, their testosterone level actually increased as compared to the fans who are associated with their losing team. So, this bidirectional relationship indicates behavior can influence hormonal levels and vice versa. So, it is possible that your behavior can influence your testosterone or your hormonal level, and sometimes hormonal levels can also influence your behavior. So, it can be in both ways. So, like this, so possibly there is a hormonal influence in gender differences, because certain hormones can make impact on your psychological characteristics. The last one is evolutionary theory that tries to explain why gender differences in the first place exist, why it is happening. So, evolutionary theory mostly focuses on reproductive success. Anything that supports reproduction and propagation of species is supported by the nature. Nature wants the species should continue in the future. So, any characteristics that promotes that possibility of reproduction and future progression, future generation, nature will support that. So, because that is the whole idea of nature, it wants to evolve, it wants to go in the next phase. So, the evolutionary theory is mostly looking at that aspect. So, evolutionary psychology says that human characteristics, whatever it is, evolved to solve adaptive problems related to survival and reproduction. Anything that help you to survive and reproduce will be promoted by the nature, it will be passed on to the next generation. So, according to this perspective, both sexes, male and female, develop in many cases similar characteristics in response to common challenges. When there is a common challenge, they develop similar things like finding adequate food and shelter, but will exhibit differences where they have faced distinct reproductive challenge, because they face certain distinct different reproductive challenges throughout the history. So, they develop certain differences also, they also face similar obstacles. So, they have had similar characteristics also. So, the characteristics that enhance reproductive success are more likely to be passed through the next generation, and this trait will often appear as an universal gender differences across various cultures and environment. So, anything that enhances possibility of reproductive success is more likely to passed on. If anything is related to female gender, it will be passed on, which helps them to reproduce successfully, or anything that is related to male reproductive success will be passed on to the next generation. So, reproductive challenges are different for both males and females. So, women face substantial reproductive investment. In terms of investment, they face much more higher investment. So, they can only conceive once a month, carry fetus for 9 months, and must provide extended care for a helpless infant. So, the burden on them is much higher than males. So, this high investment drives women to be selective about their mates, preferring partners who can offer resources and support. Consequently, women generally place higher value on mate status, ambitions, and are less inclined towards casual sex and so on. So, more likely, because that characteristics will help them survive and promote their reproductive success. So, nature will promote this kind of characteristics. In contrast, men can reproduce with less biological investment, leading to different mating strategies. Evolutionary pressures have favored men who seek multiple partners, engage in casual sex, and exhibit risk taking and aggressive behaviors to compete for female partners and so on. So, because their reproductive challenges are different than females. So, that also leads to different characteristics of them. Men also prioritize physical attractiveness in mates as it signals health and fertility and so on. So, biologically, evolutionary, certain things, certain signals, certain characteristics are promoted for reproductive success, and for both gender it is different. In terms of psychological characteristics like jealousy and infidelity, also there are gender difference. Evolutionary psychology also explains sex differences in jealousy. Women are more affected by emotional infidelity, which threatens the security of their resources, while men are more concerned with sexual infidelity, which threatens the certainty of their paternity. So, emotional infidelity, emotionally not supporting is something that influences women more. Sexual infidelity is something that influences more for male, particularly because it is related to their certainty of paternity and so on. So, evolutionary forces will influence those emotional behaviors. These differences in jealousy have been consistently observed across cultures and significant effect. This pattern is supported by both self-reported and physiological measures and so on. So, these are kind of guided by evolutionary forces. So, these are different theoretical explanation why possibly there is a gender difference in terms of personality traits, and each have their own explanation. So, an integrative perspective can be more helpful in understanding gender difference. So, a theoretical account we have examined seems very different, all are explaining in the different perspectives, but they are not incompatible, they are all touching on different aspects. So, indeed to some extent they operate at different levels of analysis. Evolutionary psychology suggests why sexes differs, males and females differ, but it does not specify how they become different. Hormonal and socialization theories explains in detail how this gender difference became different, male and female became different, but do not says why. So, why answer is given more clearly by evolutionary theory, how aspect is given more clearly explained by socialization theory. So, like this, these are all different theories, they are trying to explain different aspects of it. So, an integrated theory of sex difference would kind of look at different levels of analysis and can give much better understanding of the reasons behind gender differences. So, with this I will stop here. So, these are few things about gender differences in the personality. We will be talking about some other aspects in the next lecture in this socio-cultural aspect. With this I stop here. Thank you.